Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Today on Oklahoma Gardening, we are starting the show off with a simple science segment to help you better understand some of the problems you might be seeing in your garden. We then take a more focused look at 6 reasons your tomatoes may not be looking so good. And finally, on a prettier note, we talk about the benefits of adding milkweed into the garden.
It's almost like an ombre of sunset colors. Not the flowers, right? If you're a part of any garden club or garden society, oftentimes this time of year, midsummer, you'll start seeing that the conversation switches from,
"Wow, my plants are doing so well this year,"
to,
"Oh no! What's happening to my plants?"
a lot of times, midsummer, we start seeing different symptoms and signs that tell us something is happening irregular with our plants. That can include spotting, curling, cupping, irregular growth on your plants, and even, for lack of a better word, oozing. Now, if you see any of these signs and symptoms, it might mean that you have a disease on your plant.
It must be a disease. But what's a disease?
A disease is a condition of a plant that impairs normal function and is typically manifested by distinguishing signs and symptoms. Well, you have your signs and your symptoms right there on the plant. In fact, that's probably what led you to think there's something wrong with your plant in the first place. But what is the disease? Well, the study of plant disease is also known as plant pathology. Fortunately, here at OSU, we have the Plant Disease and Insect Diagnostic Lab, where plant pathologists can extract samples, look under microscopes, and use tests to determine if any pathogens are present.
A pathogen? But what's a pathogen?
A pathogen is a bacterium, virus, or other microorganism that can cause diseases. If a pathogen is found to be present, then we can better know how to handle the situation. When a pathogen is found, this is known to be a biotic disease. The word biotic comes from the Greek word bios, meaning life. Biotic diseases are those that arise due to living organisms such as bacteria, fungi, viruses, and nematodes. Sometimes you might think you have a disease, but no pathogens are found. This is known as abiotic, or absence of living organisms. These are typically a result of environmental conditions such as soil, water, light, nutrients, chemical exposure, or even temperature that leads to the stress of the plant. Abiotic diseases are also known as physiological disorders. While the most assured way to identify the disease is to send a sample to the lab, there are often clues in the landscape that will tell you whether the disease is biotic or abiotic. Clue number 1. You are seeing the same symptoms on different types of plants. For instance, nutrient deficiencies will often cause the leaves of plants to turn yellow or purple. If you saw this happening on the foliage in all your various vegetable plants, this would be a clue that it is environmental, not a pathogen. Alternatively, biotic diseases that are caused by pathogens are often host-specific and will only target their preferred host. Keep in mind, however, they may like several plants from within the same plant family. For example, you might see the same problem on your squash as you do on your melons because they again are in the same plant family. But if you also see that on your corn, then it's likely an abiotic problem. This is why crop rotation is important, but that's another segment for another day. Clue number 2. Abiotic diseases or disorders can often be found in patterns or are uniform in their appearance in the landscape. This pattern or uniform appearance is due to the area of exposure to the environmental factor that's causing the symptoms. For example, frost damage on Bermuda grass can create a unique tiger stripe pattern in the fall when the frost begins to settle on the lawn. Clue number 3. Abiotic diseases are not contagious from one plant to another. In some cases, you might find that the plant will grow out of it or return to normal once the adverse environmental conditions have been removed or corrected. Clue number 4. Think about the weather. In fact, most biotic diseases are caused by fungi, and generally speaking, they like moist conditions and moderate temperatures. Now, if we've been experiencing hot, dry conditions, aka summer in Oklahoma, then the odds are that you're seeing more abiotic symptoms than biotic symptoms. And in fact, of all the labs across the country and the samples that are submitted, anywhere from 50% to 85% of those samples come back as abiotic problems, not an identified pathogen. Now, to make matters more confusing, sometimes abiotic symptoms can lead to biotic diseases, especially if you have abiotic symptoms that are affecting the leaves, the stems, or the roots. Depending on the severity, it can deteriorate the overall health of the plant, making it more of an opportunity for those pathogens to set in. This is known as a secondary biotic disease. While there are a plethora of problems that can plague your garden this time of year, understanding whether you might have an abiotic or a biotic disease on your plants can help you determine your next step. Hopefully you're starting to reap some of those rewards from your early season laboring in the vegetable garden. Of all of our vegetable garden plants, tomato is the king and has always been. However, the tomato can be somewhat tricky to grow, especially in our Oklahoma crazy environment. Today we've got 6 common reasons why your tomato might look a little less than ideal. There's nothing worse than when you go to pick some of that ripening fruit and find that you've got some rot down on the bottom of it. This is known as blossom end rot, and like its name implies, it is a rot that starts down at the blossom end. So here it was attached to this stem, and this is where the flower originally was. Now, we know that this is caused by a calcium deficiency. However, that doesn't mean that you should just go apply calcium, because it can be a result of many different factors, including the fact that if you planted your tomatoes early in the season before the soil temperatures reach 65, then those roots might not have actually been able to take up the calcium that may be existing in your soil. Another thing, I always talk about doing soil testing early in the season, and the reason why it's important to do that is to check your pH and also your nitrogen levels. If your pH is too high or you have too much nitrogen, then again, those will prevent the plant from being able to take up a lot of that calcium. Now, probably the biggest culprit for blossom end rot is inconsistent watering. You never want to let your plants get so dry that they're actually wilting. Calcium is water soluble, and if you don't water your plants, it can't take up any of that calcium. The other thing, as we get into those hot, dry, windy days, which we're known to have a few here in Oklahoma, your leaves will actually transpire more moisture than your fruit, which creates that deficit of calcium at the blossom end of your fruit. The other thing is, if you water too heavily, then that tends to cause some of those roots to die back, again, preventing those roots from taking up additional calcium. So just because blossom end rot is caused by calcium deficiency doesn't necessarily mean that you have a deficiency in your soil. There's only one cat face that we want to see in our garden, and that's Cowboy Kitty. However, all too often you might start seeing what's called cat face on your tomatoes. And this is when your tomatoes look somewhat distorted. They obviously have kind of this irregular shape, and usually you'll see a dark scarring and where it's kind of indented right there between healthy tissue. So it can take on a lot of different shapes, but you'll see where it's just overall distorted. Now this doesn't actually necessarily affect the fruit. You can cut that out. It just overall makes it less marketable and the aesthetics are less desirable. Now what causes cat face on tomatoes is typically it is caused because of irregular blooming. So the blossoms are irregularly developed, which then makes the fruit irregularly developed. Another cause is oftentimes when you have phenoxy herbicides such as 2,4-D that have been sprayed in the area, that can cause cat facing as well. Often you'll see cat face more on your larger beefsteak heirloom varieties more so than some of the others. But this here is called cat face. Did you know that tomatoes actually need sun protection? No, not this sort of sun protection. I'm talking about the vegetation and the foliage that helps cover and protect our developing fruit from the sun exposure. Now, often tomatoes can actually get sunburned. Now, this is called sun scald when you start to see it appear on the tomatoes, and usually it starts to appear up around the shoulders of the fruit or on the exposed side. Usually, again, often it develops on the mature fruit as far as the size, but it still might be green or slightly pink. And as it starts to develop, you'll see kind of this whitish kind of blemish on that shoulder, and it'll continue to develop and worsen as the fruit develops. Now, one thing that you can do to protect your plant is obviously let some of that vegetation and foliage kind of cover your plants. However, this does tend to be more of a problem on staked tomatoes versus caged tomatoes because staking you often have more exposed fruit. The other thing is if you are going to prune any of your tomatoes, make sure if you're having that exposed fruit that you do put up some sort of protection, maybe some burlap or some sort of shade cloth, especially on the west side, just to prevent sun scald on your tomatoes. Now the next thing that you might see that's affecting your plant is actually affecting the overall plant, not the fruit. And this is called physiological leaf roll. And as you can see, the name implies the leaves are actually rolling up. This tends to start on the lower part of the plant on the older leaves and work its way up. Now you won't see any yellowing with this. The plant should not have any yellowing. It should still continue to grow and have new growth and also be producing still. So otherwise the plant is relatively healthy other than just the aesthetics of what might look like it's wilting, which might cause you to water it more than is needed. So this is just a phenomenon that happens. And there's not a lot that we can do about it. We tend to find that some varieties are more susceptible to it than others, and also tomatoes that tend to be staked and pruned tend to be a little more susceptible to it than some that are kind of sprawling about. Now another factor that can often cause this in tomatoes is extreme heat, prolonged periods of heat, and combination of wet periods can cause this as well. Other than that, you should still be getting a good fruit off of it. Just know that this is not a pathogen or a disease. Now another problem we often see on our tomatoes is cracking. And this is pretty common, and you can see it usually takes on two forms. A lot of times you'll see a vertical split that's happening from the stem down the shoulder of the fruit, or oftentimes it creates this concentric circle where it's kind of this radial cracking that happens. And it happens both on large and small fruit. It doesn't really matter which hybrids you have or which type of tomatoes you have. Usually it is caused by excessive amounts of moisture, whether that's irrigation or rainfall, that proceed after an excessive dry period. And a lot of times, even if your plant is on irrigation, if you have more ideal growing conditions, then that can cause it as well. So even though it's hot and dry right now, we've got these plants on irrigation. If we cool off, then that's going to allow this plant to want to grow more. And what's literally happening is that inside of that tomato is growing faster than the outside skin, causing that cracking to happen. Now really the only thing that you can do to prevent this is as soon as you start to see tomatoes that are starting to turn pink, go ahead and harvest them and allow them to ripen indoors. Another problem that you might see on your tomatoes is, well, the fact that you might not be getting any tomatoes, and this is known as blossom drop. While tomatoes are warm season crops, we know that our summer temperatures can be beyond warm and in fact downright sweltering. If our summer temperatures, our daytime temperatures get above 90 degrees, this can cause your flower buds to drop, and excessive winds can also cause further problems with that. I mean, what days do we not have high temperatures and excessive winds? That's known as July and August around here in Oklahoma. But more than the daytime temperatures, looking at the nighttime temperatures, if they are anywhere outside of the range of 55 to 70 degrees, then this can also cause the pollen in these flowers to become non-viable. So if these flowers are there, but they actually aren't getting pollinated, then they're just going to abort and drop off, therefore not producing any fruit for you. While there are a few more heat-tolerant varieties on the market, other than that, there's very little that we can actually do to prevent blossom drop. Although one of the things you do want to be cautious of is not to put down excessive amount of nitrogen, as that only encourages more vegetation and also prevents flowering and pollination. Now, the good news to all of this is if you're able to maintain a healthy plant, as soon as our summer temperatures start to decline a little bit and we get back in that viable pollen range, you'll soon see your tomatoes start to produce fruit once again. So as you can see, it can be somewhat tricky growing that perfect red tomato. That's why it's so important to have done a soil test, know the problems that you might encounter going through the season, and also continue watering appropriately. Today we're joined by Ray Moranz with the Xerces Society, and if you're not familiar with the Xerces Society, Ray, do you mind telling us a little bit about it first before we get into some of the other subjects?
I am happy to. The Xerces Society is a nonprofit organization based in Portland, Oregon, and we're all about saving invertebrates, meaning insects, crayfish, spiders, things like that, the little creatures that make the world run. And we have staff in many, many states. I'm our representative for Oklahoma, and my specialty is pollinators. But yeah, we work to save the little creatures of the planet.
Because they're so important, right? I mean, they do so many things that we just take for granted a lot of times.
Absolutely. Obviously, pollinators are necessary to keep our flowers happy so that they can produce seeds, so our vegetable plants can produce tomatoes and peppers, so our fruit trees can make apples and oranges. And then we've got dung beetles out on the ranches. You've got a ranch. You need dung beetles to get rid of the dung.
Absolutely. They're doing that natural composting process for us.
That's right.
So today we're talking about pollinators, and we're standing next to one of our favorite plants here at the garden. We've got several different milkweeds, but the most obvious one is this common milkweed. Let's talk a little bit about just milkweeds in general and incorporating them into your garden.
Sure. I'm a huge fan of milkweeds. I think I have 12 species at home. Oklahoma has 30 species of milkweeds, so I'll be getting more. This is one of the most well-known species. This is called common milkweed. And why do we care about milkweeds? Well, obviously, for those who are into butterflies, monarch butterflies lay their eggs on milkweed plants, and only on milkweed plants. If you don't have milkweeds, you're not going to have monarch caterpillars. But secondly, the flowers tend to be really, really good for pollinators in general. And these flowers here have two small butterflies on them. And one of them, the one slightly farther away from my finger, is actually quite rare.
That one flying there,
Yeah, it's a Dion skipper. And this is only the second or third one I've ever seen in Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
So it's very special to have it here. But that's an example of how great of a resource milkweeds can be for pollinators. And it's not just butterflies, bees, flies, beetles, which are all pollinators.
Yeah, we've got all sorts of things flying all around us here. And not to mention a showy plant, obviously, with both the texture, but also the flower as well.
Yeah.
Now, there is one other little guy on this. Let's talk about the milkweed aphid for a minute. if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
unfortunately, there's this little yellow aphid, and there's not just one, there are a few hundred. And that's quite normal. It's hard to avoid. Now, you can squash them. And if you only had 1 or 2 milkweed plants, you might want to do that. Or you can wash them with soap and water. I tend to leave them be because I have a lot of milkweed plants, and I don't want to take the time to squash them. And if you leave them be, then the natural predators of the aphids will eventually kick into gear and eat them up. And on this plant, we saw one of the natural predators. Now, ladybugs are natural predators, both as adults and as larvae. Also lacewings and lacewing larvae. And you'll actually see the populations of these natural predators build up during the course of the summer as they gobble up the aphids.
Well, we got a little bit of food for those
Yeah.
predator insects to come on in here. So, but that's not a problem. It's okay to have the aphids. It's typical what you'll find. That doesn't deter the monarch or anything?
It does not deter the monarch, especially on a big plant.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. Now, if you have a little seed, if you're growing milkweeds from seeds and you have a seedling that's coated with them, I might go ahead and rub those aphids off.
It's going to hurt the health of that plant being
That's
so
right,
small.
if it's
Yeah.
a little seedling.
Yeah.
But big plants like this be just
So when we talk, this is a perennial milkweed, and
Yes.
you mentioned there's about 30 different
Yeah.
types here in Oklahoma that are
Yep.
native, but a lot of times people buy non-native milkweeds. Can we talk about some of the differences between buying native and non-native milkweeds?
Absolutely. I strongly encourage people to buy the native milkweeds. They're not as easy to find, but they are becoming easier to find. The native ones are all perennials. The native ones have been here for many, many years.
Yeah.
They belong here. And the bees and the butterflies love them. The exotic ones, including tropical milkweed, are annuals. They've just come here, and it could be that they might start to invade our landscape and cause problems. And we don't want tropical milkweed to become another nasty plant that takes over.
Now, there's been some talk about a parasite that might be on some of those tropicals. Is that a concern here in Oklahoma, or at this point, most tropicals die back? So where are we at with that OE parasite that might be on some of the tropical milkweeds?
Yeah, there's a parasite, a protozoan parasite called OE. OE is short for Xerces electroscura. And that's natural and native to the U.S., and our milkweeds have it, but seemingly to a less degree than the tropical milkweed.
Okay.
And the fact that they go dormant and their foliage doesn't last quite as long. The populations of the OE build up during the course of the summer, particularly on tropical milkweed, and into the fall. The fact that it dies in winter here is actually a good thing.
Okay.
That plant is most problematic in Florida, California, Texas.
Okay.
Deep south.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about that too much just yet.
I still worry a little bit about it,
Yeah.
but I don't plant it in part for that reason.
Okay. And what about when we're buying these milkweeds from nurseries? Because, we don't know how they've been treated prior to us getting them. Do we need to be concerned or talk to our vendors when we're buying this milkweed that could be, any pesticides could be harmful?
Yeah, that's a good idea with milkweeds and with any plants that you're planting for bees and butterflies. The Xerces Society has published some studies recently showing that some of the milkweeds that we're getting from nurseries have high enough levels of insecticide to kill the caterpillars. So yes, it's a good idea to talk to your nurseries, to your vendors, to find out if the plants are being treated.
All right. So buy native if you can, obviously, and then also make sure you're getting it from a reputable vendor as well.
Yep.
So thank you so much, Ray, for sharing this information with us. We appreciate all that you guys are doing over there to protect our insects.
My great pleasure.
There are a lot of great horticulture activities this time of year. Be sure and consider some of these events in the weeks ahead.
As the heat continues to crank up, we've got more plants, projects, and progress to share with you next week on Oklahoma Gardening.
What did I say the other day?
Okay.
My plants are dying. Could it be a murder?
To find out more information about show topics as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure to visit our website at oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. Tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater gem. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shop, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Tulsa Garden Center at Woodward Park, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, Smart Pot, and the Tulsa Garden Club.